I don't know why I keep doing that. I mute myself and I got to keep on muting myself. Hello, everyone. This is FY Ellens Ede with Social Impact Consulting. Welcome again to another episode of Devsectorseries. I'm very excited. As you know, I'm always excited about these sessions because I get to talk to development professionals who are passionate about their work and talking about some of the happenings in the dev sector, in the development sector. So I'm very excited about that. So thank you so much. Like I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, that when Dev Sector Series time changed from 12 p.m., that I will always let you all know. So I just informed you guys that that this session is at 3 p.m. because, you know, these development enthusiasts and professionals are very busy people, so I have to work with their time and their scheduling, and it will be worth every single minute of your time. So I'm extremely excited about this. So we are going to have a very special guest today. He is actually the UN resident coordinator in Ghana. I mean, this is really special. This is somebody who is representing the leadership of the UN in the various countries, which is Ghana. So he's going to be giving us some very exciting information about the Sustainable Development Goals, where Africa is, what role we play. I'm very excited about this session. So we're just going to be going over right quick his video bio. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in another minute.
Is a seasoned international development practitioner with over 25 years of experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, having worked in the senior country and regional leadership roles in Africa, Asia, and in Europe. Specifically, he has worked with Action Aid International, OxFam Great Britain, Absolute Return for Kids, Palladium, and Chemonics. Mr. Abani has also led successful implementation of projects for DFID and USAID. Most recently, Charles served as Africa's director in Chemonics UK division, prior to which he led the USAID flagship civil society project in Nigeria, USAID SACE. Mr. Abani is from the Federal Republic of Nigeria and holds a BA in history from the University of Nigeria, an MSc in political science from Ahmadu Bello University, and an executive management certificate from Oxford University. Allow me to present to some and introduce to others Mr. Charles Abani, UN Resident Coordinator in Ghana.
Hello, Charles. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, FY, and good afternoon to everybody who's on the program too. It's a privilege for me.
Thank you. So what's it like in Ghana? How you doing out there?
Well, Ghana is really nice. It's quiet. It's a bit more organized than Nigeria is. So it's cool, and I'm enjoying it.
That's really, really good. I mean, once I posted that we're going to be having a conversation with you, I got so much excitement. So we're just looking forward to this exciting conversation you're going to have with us.
I hope I live up to expectations.
You will. We will. We trust you. So, now we're seeing you as a diplomat and, working on. So anytime I'm looking at Charles now, I'm thinking SDGs, the UN 2030 goals. So that's kind of the theme that we're going to be looking at on today. So I'm just going to get right to it. So our first question is a very big one. So how is the African continent faring on SDGs? What's the progress? Any stagnation? Any regression? So can you just give us some insight on that?
Thank you, F1. And just to conclude, it's actually really exciting to be here in Ghana. I think we live in a time of particularly a lot of doom and gloom, particularly on the African continent and back home. And to be in a place that is excited, committed, taking rhetoric to plans and action is absolutely exciting. I just came off a call, the Global Sustainable Development Investment Fair, which is a key plank upon which I think progress will be made, where Ghana and Pakistan were presenting a pipeline of investment projects to a range of private sector actors globally. And so to be in that kind of exciting place with commitments from the president downwards is really a great place to be. So back to your sort of question on the SDGs, and I think just a few points from me at the very beginning. I think national development, local development is the SDGs. Those SDGs aren't a separate track of work. And for a long time, I think people have always kind of tried to deal with them as if there's something different from national development, but they're not. And so the question really is how a country is doing in terms of meeting the basics for everybody, in terms of access to health, access to education, equality, zero poverty and hunger, among other things. And in the way that I like to dissect or separate out the SDGs, I often say that, the government has a primary responsibility for the first six, those six SDGs that account for, if you like, the enablers that then enable everybody else to progress. And obviously SDG 17, creating an enabling environment for that. But the rest of the SDGs around sort of sustainable energy, around industrialization, around infrastructure, all of those really involve everybody. And actually, if the government does the best it can on those and SDG 16, which is about strengthening institutions, then I think people have the capacity to do the rest. And Nigeria, on its best day, has demonstrated that capacity, not just in country, but globally. So, how are we doing? There's progress in some areas. There's a lot of stagnation, and in some places there's regression. I think context is really important on the continent. Just a couple of days ago, I looked at a map on conflict, and I shared it in a couple of forums in Nigeria, where literally we are almost surrounded by a sea of red. And so in those places where conflict is growing, it's really difficult to see progress. And obviously, I know we'll talk a bit about COVID-19. It was already difficult, even in the best of places. Ghana itself, where I'm working, has made significant progress on a number of the core areas. But in order to really, really move forward and achieve 2030, much more needs to be done. I'll talk a bit about some of the big things, but I think sustainable finance to enable these things to happen, which is effectively sustainable finance for national development, is a key thing that is squeezing countries today. And any country that wants to really engage with and make sure that its own national development is aligned to and contributing to achieving these SDGs will have to have a sustainable, reliable, transparent process of resource allocation and expenditure to enable that to happen. And so middle income countries like Ghana and Nigeria on paper face a different set of challenges as they seek to leapfrog to the next level and begin to create self-reliance models and actually rely less and less on donor inputs, on borrowing that is really meeting basic services, but really the engine begins to turn on. For poorer countries who are facing crisis, and a number of them who are emerging middle class countries or middle income countries who are being pushed back into crisis, places like Ethiopia, the challenges are huge for them. And as I've said, COVID-19 has just not helped. And for many, the battle is just to survive COVID-19 first before discussing these bigger issues. Let me stop there.
Interesting. There's a really interesting way of looking at it in terms of making sure that in-house countries are able to get their systems together in terms of transparency in financing, and then also even some of the security challenges that some other countries are dealing with, to even make sure that they're able to fulfill some of some of these goals. Thank you so much for your feedback on that. So we're going to go into the next question. You talked about COVID-19, that you were going to get into it. So in the context of COVID-19, as we know, the UN, through the World Health Organization, what is really on the helm of affairs in creating awareness and in working with other countries to make sure that we're able to address the pandemic. So in the African context, what are the challenges and the opportunities? Where are the challenges and opportunities?
Thank you. And let me say, before even COVID-19 came, and last year the UN Secretary General, just ahead of the COVID pandemic, really talked about the end to conflicts. And in last year's
Yes.
sort of International Day of Peace, I said that really peace is the rocket fuel of development, and many countries have both the potential to achieve the SDGs and to take their place on the global stage, but they cannot do this without peace. Peace is a constant distractor, or conflict is a constant distractor and a constant sapper of energy. And I think, particularly because I know the audience here is principally Nigerian, actually really focusing on what will bring peace and unity is foundational to actually being able to engage in the takeoff. And of course, then came the COVID pandemic and caught us all in the middle of everything. And clearly, in this context, we had a shift. And as you point out rightly, first, COVID was identified as a health related challenge, exposing the fragility in our health systems and the absolute inadequacies that we face in terms of dealing with this stuff that even today we know we're facing challenges. We have not invested appropriately in R&D and are at best going to be recipients through COVAX and other facilities of vaccines largely manufactured by others. And so I think yesterday there was a huge conversation at the African Union level to begin to look at how we can develop the capacity on the continent, not just to be downstream consumers of vaccines that are life-saving and necessary, but producers of these, so that we have a better grasp on the future that we face. But clearly, COVID has created many challenges, and some of them relate to the opportunities. Hundreds of millions of new vulnerable people who we can't even map. We don't know where they are. Nigeria is just in the process of even figuring out how to log people into the NIN system. How do you track these people?
Yes.
How do you target resources to the vulnerable people that you know who are most likely to be vulnerable? How do you even identify who the new vulnerable people are as you try to respond to them? And obviously, the impact of COVID lockdowns has been huge on the socioeconomic front as well. So it isn't just about restoring health systems, it's about restoring livelihoods. It's about preventing people who are slipping into vulnerability from slipping into vulnerability. It's addressing the significant challenges already there of sexual and gender-based violence, which were exacerbated particularly by the lockdown. The sense of injustice and marginalization increases. It's about a fledgling, largely informal economic context in which small and micro businesses were literally wiped out. Some of them were surviving on a day-to-day basis and literally were wiped out. And again, as I say, without data, even the best government with the best intentions cannot target incentives or palliative measures directly to those groups without data. So if anything, beyond fragile systems, the absence of clear, robust data that enables targeted actions to take place has always been an issue. I think also when we look at the sort of macroeconomic context of countries, if you're already highly indebted, if you're already borrowing huge amounts of money, assuming certain growth indices that your economy would take, COVID has dealt a kind of sometimes killer, but certainly a massive blow to those plans, while still
Yes.
leaving you highly indebted. And so not only do you have new debts that you need to accrue in order to address the health-related challenges, but then you're left in the context of real macroeconomic instability, which means that over the longer haul, those investments that are being made to enable a sustainable march towards the SDGs become even harder. And then, kind of I started out by talking about conflict and peace being the rocket fuel and engine. But in times of difficulty like this, difference is exacerbated more than togetherness. And so in a continent that is full of strife and conflict, those inequalities are exacerbated. They express themselves in terms of poor social cohesion. They express themselves in terms of strengthening community resilience mechanisms. And so what you have is a recipe for spiraling disaster, at best stagnation, if not regression. So it can be a very bad story. But I think we should also look at what the opportunities offer for
Okay,
us. And I
definitely.
think there's no way that as the saying goes, every crisis is an opportunity, and we have to use it as
Definitely.
an opportunity. And I think there are many sectors, and I'm sure there are lots of people on this conversation who will identify different sectors that are absolutely essential to engage in. The way that the UN approached it across the board was to look at sort of five key things: make sure that health systems are strong, begin to look at how to ensure and protect access to basic services. We know what's happened to education. We know what's happened to, if you like, social safety nets in a period like this. We know also what's happened to women. Women have borne the brunt of this. Disadvantaged groups have been most impacted. But then also to look at how you can support economic recovery, if not even recovery, survival of that economy, while looking broadly to re-engineer macro plans, because unless you re-engineer those macro plans, you don't have the basis for sustainability moving forward. And I think what I want to talk about are probably like four key things that I think are essential opportunities. One is this question of sustainable finance. Ghana is, and it's great to be a very proud nation with a very strong ambition. In fact, they articulate it in a document called Ghana Beyond Aid.
I
And
see.
as Rwanda has, and as a few other countries have, their aspiration is more long term, and it is linked to becoming a self-reliant country. And so all
I
the
see.
steps below that are very linked into that. And that's certainly a lesson for Nigeria as we keep rolling between 2020 visions and 2030 visions. Are we clear about that? And I think that's really important. But sustainable finance is key because the global financial systems comes with global rules, and we know that global rules often favor particular economies and particular countries that have depth. So how do we use this opportunity to rethink financing? I think it's less than a week ago. I actually sat or at least I was sitting in on a conversation about Nigeria's debt and debt cancellation and debt forgiveness and the opportunities for Nigeria in the context of this. But really, unless you have a sustainable finance mechanism, things will not work. What new domestic resource generation is possible within those contexts? How do we move from an availability of money, which is more of a funding model, to a financing and investment model? That
I
means that
see.
we are spending money on the right things that themselves catalyze and create transformation that then builds an energy around things. So how is public finance, you know, invested in a way that attracts private finance? And increasingly, certainly in the UN, all heads are turning now to the role of the private sector. And so again, the SDGs is not about government. It's about how government, maybe at best, is providing sort of reassurance and providing a basis for financing for the private sector to come in, but very much relying on the private sector to generate the significant global resources required. What the globe needs to achieve the SDGs is less than 2 days of transactions on the global stock exchange. And so that tells us the money is there, but we have failed to be able to figure out how to really harness this money. And if we
I
achieve
see.
industrialization, create jobs, build a resilient economies, then the SDGs will automatically be achieved. And so we need to think again about how we focus on just the government doing this, but identifying what the government does around that. And then sort of sitting beneath this really important factor of finding sustainable, impacting and impactful finance are, I guess, three real key opportunities. One of the other global crises is the global climate crisis, and we know that even as we speak, and a number of us are still reliant in Africa on mineral resources that are actually becoming dated. How do our economies use this opportunity to get this sustainable in finance and invest in green growth? Green growth that is actually looking over the horizon at the opportunities that are ahead of us.
I
So what
see.
does this mean in terms of the kinds of finance that we're looking for, the kinds of resources, the kinds of industry that we want to build, the value chains in agriculture, which is a key mainstay in a country like Nigeria? What are those value chains going to look like? And how green will they be? In the context of pollution and plastics, how are we seizing the opportunity to revisit the way in which we use both our riverine and coastal resources? And how are we really creating those opportunities that will enable us to be part of that big global economy?
I
I think the
see.
second thing I've alluded to, so I've talked about big finance, green growth. The digital transformation that COVID-19 has expressed is
It's enormous. Yeah.
undeniable. Undeniable.
Yeah.
If you break it into three things, it's about production. How are we going to live, produce, and grow in a digital economy? And so what kinds of investments are needed there? How are we going to learn in a world of digital in which we have seen interruptions in the way that young people are learning and the way that knowledge is transferred and exchanged? How are we going to do that? And for Africa, and particularly for countries like Nigeria, how are we going to use this to improve governance? What kind of systems do we need in place? We can
Exactly.
track resources, we can track people, and we can make the right kinds of investments in the right spaces. And so digital, whether you're working in agri, whether you're working in health, education, across the board, how are we taking advantage of this? But also, how are we owning it? Because it's so easy for us to become, yet again, end consumers in this. And so beyond kind of like investing in the knowledge and the partnerships with the big global digital giants, how are we protecting and owning our data? What's the data governance systems we have in place on the continent that means that we are not
Exactly.
going to be at the back end of that? And I
Exactly.
think finally, of course, and I would say this inclusion. If we're learning any lessons from COVID, it is that certain communities have been hit harder. So when we talk about green growth, we must talk about inclusive growth. And I think that means that we must revisit, not just from a protection point of view, the rights of women and other excluded groups, but also ensure that we're involved in the right dialogues that are including those people in the conversations. If we don't have
Exactly.
inclusive growth, we will not be able to reap the digital dividends. A lot of the tech capacity sits with young people. For a continent full of 65% and above of young people, ensuring that we are creating the opportunities that enable them to actually occupy the economic space and become the giants of tomorrow. If we're not thinking in this way, then we're likely to fail. So I think for me, those are particular opportunities that really need to be enhanced. And I think so. Finally, I would say partnerships. And often we say partnerships glibly, but the truth is that the construction of the kinds of relationships that are going to be required, particularly when we come to the MSME sector, where a lot of African businesses are really complex, and no one set of institutions can do all that is required. And so for us, certainly in the UN, positioning ourselves to be able to connect better, to help to connect those dots and ensure that big finance finds big projects, but small finance finds small projects, and those things are connected in a sustainable way. So I think these are some of the big opportunities, whether you sit in health or education, or you are concerned about economic growth, or you're concerned about the macroeconomy within which the stability required to enable us. A lot of talk about build back better. I say build forward better in a way that will be effective.
That is really very comprehensive, talking about in the context of 19, the immense challenges that we have, and then the opportunities which kind of
Mm.
lifted us up in terms of seeing, the times of collaborations we can partnerships that we can put together, in terms of how we can even self-sustain in terms of financially, and just including marginalized groups as well. This has been quite this has been quite comprehensive in the context of COVID-19. So based on what you have said now, what do you feel, and being in the with the UN and being a diplomat and being in the trenches, what is the UN doing to evolve and become better fit for purpose in supporting the achievement of the SDGs, especially for developing countries just like here in Africa?
So thanks. I smile when people say I'm a diplomat, and I guess I am. But I think more. I still think of myself more as a development practitioner, working in that space. I kind of think if I describe the opportunity I saw, was the immense power that the UN has in terms of playing this kind of convening role, connecting some of the dots that many actors here who've worked within civil society will know is frustrating, is having that face time with government and being able to take these ideas and then work to try and achieve them. Last year marked 75 years of the UN, and
Okay.
really it's supposed to be a year of real reflection. 1945, the UN arose out of the ashes of the Second World War, looking at the nexus between peace, development, security as the basis for moving forward. And I think that obviously it was a great thing at that time, and that, as I said, contextually, the UN has different roles to play in different places. But there was a investment in kind of saying, last year was the point to really reflect on what is the UN supposed to be, and what is the UN that its member states, Ghana is a member of the UN, want to see. And again, being fit for purpose definitely means not one size fits all. Fragility, as we said, plays a role. What kind of role we play, even in Nigeria, my counterpart and colleague there, very experienced Ed Callan, will know that the interventions in the Northeast or the Northwest are very different from the kinds of interventions around the economy and in other parts of the country. And so making sure that we are more connected to our context is really, really important, and that we don't come with top-down models that are not relevant. The
Okay.
UN has traditionally been very focused as an intergovernmental agency around working primarily with governments. We know
Yeah.
that's absolutely essential, but we know it's not sufficient. And just in the context of the conversations that I've had, how are we getting much better at turning our heads sideways to look at civil society and the role that they play, and also looking the other way to see how the private sector is able to become more SDG focused and more SDG friendly. And those two things, profit on the one hand and impact, are not mutually separatable. So how must we shift ourselves to become that? But I also think that the host of agencies that sit within the UN system have a responsibility too, to make sure, and I think this is particularly for Africa and particularly around sustainable finance, to really play a stronger role in fairer and equitable access to finance.
Okay.
What are the rules of the game globally? What are the rules of the game here continentally? It's really inspiring to see the African Union begin to take more of a serious approach to Agenda 2063, and really saying, how are we going to become the leaders of that process? So I think for us in the UN, it's really about, at the core of our mandate is to support governments to achieve their development agendas. That's kind of, if you like, prime directive one. And so if we're doing that, how are we really supporting to achieve the development aspirations of the countries within which we work, rather than necessarily just maintaining a global system that works on a good day for everybody partially, but particularly on a bad day works really bad for Africa. So how are we supporting growing value chains that mean that cocoa producers in Ghana are less vulnerable to the price fluctuations when there is a crisis? How are we supporting industrialization, use of key mechanisms like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to begin to create opportunities for Africans to grow and trade among themselves primarily, and maybe work harder on making sure that those businesses that are supported through mechanisms like AFTA are effectively benefiting and growing African businesses, and particularly African women's businesses, because they have been disadvantaged, in a way that enables them to gradually come forward. Less be this purveyor of just global standards from on high, and in fact be more. I always say both are important, but be more contextually, you could say, bottom-up driven in the way that we are both planning and providing services, support and advice. And I think the last thing that the UN must stop being is a deliverer of services. And this is particularly important. Our greatest, I guess, comparative advantage is a set of competencies and skills and insights that come from that global picture. It's a privileging place to be, and a humbling space. Certainly since I joined here, to see the breadth of what 24 agencies, UN agencies do across Ghana, from everything from supporting policing services on the one hand, to children and fighting disease, to labor rights for domestic workers, to food systems and food security systems, a huge privilege, but also lots of access to information. There are competent both government agencies and civil society actors and private sector actors in any of these countries who can actually do more. And so we must step away from doing more and be more supportive in the way that we engage and do things. And particularly, we were told we must empower young people to really become the engines of change. So I think these are very important dimensions here. Don't create the mold, don't recreate the mold, build it from the bottom, and listen more to what people are saying.
That's really interesting. So the UN is really trying to kind of shape itself to accommodate each of its member countries, because it's not a one size fits all type of thing, and to make sure that the UN is more of an enabler for countries to be able to empower them to kind of to keep moving forward. Like you said, in terms of healthcare, helping with policing, and some of the services that you are supporting in where you are in Ghana. So we're almost rounding up. I have a few questions in the comments. So if you have any questions, those of you who are watching, if you have any questions, please put them in the comment section, and then we'll be happy to answer them as soon as we're done. I know that there are some questions lined up, locked and loaded for you, Charles. So we're going to be moving. So this is going to be more of a personal question for you. So how are you finding the role of the UN resident coordinator? So what are some of the challenges? This is a question from me to you, because I've been wondering, like, what's it been like? So what are some of the challenges you're facing, and what are some of the opportunities?
So yeah, great. And when I told folk I was taking on this job, the more forthright among them said, "Are you truly the diplomat, Charles? Can you be this diplomat?" My update to you all is I'm learning, and I'm learning fast and hard,
Okay.
how to be a diplomat. And I
Okay.
think it's no, it's exciting. As I said, it's a privilege. The breadth of it is enormous. Whatever hair I had left has since disappeared. But I think it's certainly a huge opportunity to bring together the years of experience that I've had, while still climbing a very steep learning curve in terms of beginning to understand the country well. I think Ghana is a good place, generally a friendly country. Yes, we have our jollof rice wars, and I'm sure we'll continue to have those jollof rice wars. But I think there are a lot of strong
You're
traditions.
neutral on that one, Abby. No problem. We'll have a
As
discussion.
you can see, I have become the diplomat. And really kind of a huge opportunity to connect with a range of development partners and work together to achieve this. Obviously, significant challenges. Both for me personally, is a culture shock, joining a system that's quite different. But I think also for those, as we join and also begin to say, why don't we do things differently? But I think that's the job, and that's what makes it exciting every day when you get up. If it was that good, and I was able to go to the golf course, then I wouldn't really be adding value here. So, exciting is how I would put it.
Okay, that's really good. That's really good that you're finding the role both exciting and challenging. And because initially when I found out that you took this role, I'm like, okay, he's going to be a diplomat. Okay, let's see how this plays out. And it looks like you're transitioning very, very well. So do you have any final thoughts for us before we go into the questions from the audience?
Maybe let's deal with any questions from the
Okay,
audience, and
let's
then
let's
let me
do
see whether,
that.
yeah.
The first question is from Kingsley Atang. He said, "How is the UN measuring the positive impact from non-profits that contribute to SDGs?"
So, I mean, this is an important thing. And in November last year, we had a high-level visit from the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, to Ghana. And both at that, during her visit, and subsequently earlier this year, we've had a set of interesting conversations with civil society about the role that civil society really needs to play. And it's always mixed. It's certainly one, our point is the UN needs to get closer to civil society. I mean, I've had a historical bent towards that, but they have played a strong role. In December, or sort of in the lead up to the December elections here, which promised to be potentially conflictual. In fact, Chidi Odinkalo, in his press briefing to the Financial Times, had said Ghana's elections are boring. There's not going to be any fight. They're going to agree everything. But I think actually civil society played a very strong role in the peace process, brokering that. And I think civil society, once it is credible, can begin to play that role. And so civic actors were the key ones who brought the key political parties to the table to really push for a peace accord and a peace roadmap that led to peaceful elections here in Ghana. Clearly, throughout COVID, there has been a strong role for civic actors here. And that role continues to grow on. For those of you who are following issues in the media, there are questions about transparency and accountability. More recently, a lot of very national and hot debate around issues like LGBTQI+ here in Ghana, which requires a strong ecosystem of civil actors, civic actors engaging in. And constantly when I sit here in the UN and my colleagues say, we want to go to government to advocate for this on behalf of people, I keep saying our role is to support civic actors to be able to advocate those issues. If they can, our success should be measured not on how effective we are at advocating, but on how effectively we see other actors, particularly civic actors, engaging in the right kind of advocacy. Here, there's a strong push for an affirmative action bill that will see more women participate in politics. Ghana is better than Nigeria, but still has a ways to go. And on the continent, we know there are not enough women in leadership positions participating in political dialogue and leading political change. And so the role and space for civic actors to do this, because Ghanaians want it, Nigerians want it, not because the UN says that they want this. And so there's been some pushback too, where actors have said to me, both over the elections and more recent issues, we need the UN to be much stronger on this. And I say back to them, actually, we need you to be more stronger on these issues, because it's important that national development will be led by nationals. And so the kind of, particularly when it comes to this big financing, the kind of engagement and oversight and insights that civil society have to the kind of financial frameworks that countries are agreeing, what money is used for, whether it's COVID relief funding or it's actually build back better, build forward better kind of economies. What's that mix between debt and equity? How is the government using its resources to leverage other actors to bring the resources to the table, to whom they must be accountable to? Really, really important roles for civil society towards achieving the SDGs, and not just focusing on SDG 1 to 5, around sort of zero hunger, zero poverty, gender equality, but also the other things that if the economy is growing, if industry is expanding, if we have a better approach to climate resilience and climate recovery, then we will have a better economy, which means more health-seeking behavior. So let's not just focus at one end, but across the spectrum of the Sustainable Development Goals.
That makes a lot of sense. And one thing that you noted, especially when it came to the democratic process of Ghana, that they were able to pull things together because of the civic actors that were in place. So it takes the nonprofit organizations that represent the people to actually push to contribute to SDGs. So I have another question, and I think you covered this, but maybe you have a bit more to say. What are the priorities for the UN in the context of addressing SDG 2020 to 2030 target? This is by Joe Otubas.
Mm. So hi Joe, how are you? I hope everything's good with you guys and the Afghan. Yay, go the Afghan.
Yes, yes.
But I think the kind of key things that I've mentioned are extremely important. It's 9 years now to go, and those 9 years are going to go very rapidly. And we know
Very
that the
quickly,
impact
yes.
of COVID has been really strong in terms of dragging back progress in a number of different areas. And so the kind of investments that are required to really make sure that the next 9 years count is really, really important. And maybe not even focus on achieving all of the SDGs in certain contexts, but then say, what do we need to achieve them? And as I've said, some of the counter thinking that is required is that actually, if you invest more just in education, but you aren't investing in jobs, and what you'll have is a pile of discontented young people coming into the workplace with nothing to do. So what's the balance of investments that's required across all of those SDGs so that we are actually achieving sustainable and sustained response? And here in Ghana, working with the Ghana government, we've been talking a lot about, so what are those priorities that are catalytic, that are transformative, that have multiplier effects on them? And I think stepping up all of us across these three sectors, civil society, government, and the private sector, to then say, where should we put not just one, not gamble on just one thing, but what are the things that we need to be gambling on that are likely to lead us to that growth place effectively. So I think for us, those are the key ones, and certainly the opportunities that exist now, digital, green, inclusion. Never have we had that opportunity before, and never have we learned enough lessons about the need now for Africa to have some backbone, stand up on its own, and utilize these institutions. All the African countries are members of the United Nations, really push for reforms at the global level that mean we have fairer financing available, fairer deals. If we want green climate change in Africa, but we know that a number of those economies rely on fossil fuels to generate the resources to run their economies, what kinds of negotiations should African countries be involved in order to broker a deal that enables them not to be reliant just on fossil fuels, but to use that to leapfrog to the next place?
To
And these are
transition.
complex conversations, and we need all the actors engaged effectively, particularly civic actors.
Amazing. Thank you. So I have a question and a comment from Dr. Yudi Akman. She says here that the digital economy is a great opportunity for the development and transformation of the African continent. And she comes in here with a question saying, how are we tying this emerging opportunity of a post-COVID world to the global agenda of the UN and other bilateral agencies?
Thanks, and hi, Yudi. I hope that that I've said a few of the things that
You
relate
mentioned
to this.
you mentioned a few
Yeah,
things
I've
here.
mentioned
Yes.
a few of them. I agree with you. We just launched the process to the countdown to the Ghana census on the 29th of June, and the vice president here, to use his words, data is the new oil. and definitely data is the new oil. And I've talked about this in three kind of key dimensions. I think one of them is about transparency and accountability and how we're able to use data more effectively. If we need to raise more domestic resources, then we need to be able to account for those domestic resources better. We need to be able to allocate and plan. We need to look at the different contexts that we're here. But we need to increasingly see data as a source of learning. And so how are we learning from the pandemic and making sure that we're really building digital systems of learning that will enable the next generation to really come through? But how are we creating spaces for digital application I guess, economic opportunity? We know that a lot of businesses did go digital during COVID. Even here, my supplier of okra and bono soup comes purely digitally to me every day via
Really?
via suppliers here who have been able to develop a real online business in this sector in response to COVID. So though I was locked away for up to 3 months, I never lacked because of those. But how are we transforming those opportunities? And more importantly, are we engaging in the serious governance issues about who owns this data ultimately
Exactly.
and how it will be used? And I think,
Yeah.
again, just referring back to Joe's point, or maybe it was Kingsley's point about kind of the role and space of civil society in really engaging in those governance conversations. Are we selling everything to Google? Twitter just announced yesterday that they are arriving here in Ghana, their first location on this continent. They're setting up, Twitter is setting up here in Ghana. And so what does that mean for data and data
I see.
ownership?
I see.
Are we again consumers, or are we going to be owners? These are
I
big
see.
questions that really need to be asked when it comes to these sorts of things. And how are we creating the transparency and accountability that will attract foreign direct investment in the droves that it needs to come in, but foreign direct investment that works for us? In the presentation we were in just before this, and the other countries should remain unnamed, they're talking about countries, investors coming in and being able to repatriate 100% of their profits. We know that one of the biggest problems facing Africa's supply of resources is illicit financial flows. How are we setting up systems, investment systems, that allow the resources that belong to the continent to stay on the continent
To
rather
stay.
than to be sucked through a long straw out of the continent to enable other
Exactly.
continents to continue with their models? The UN belongs to
Exactly.
all of us, and so we must use the UN to achieve Africa's development objectives as well as the global development objectives. And those two things are not in conflict, in my opinion.
Interesting. This is really something in terms of trying to make sure that we're able to develop Africa as a whole, and like you said, data being the new oil. Who is going to own the data? Are we going to be consumers or producers of data? And how are we even going to navigate that? It's I've really been on the whole fourth industrial revolution in terms of how that is going to work. So I just have another comment from Abu Bakr Abdullahi, one of my great supporters. Interesting conversation on SDGs. So I think that would be a good way to just segue to get a sense of what your final thoughts are with regards to achieving SDGs, etc. And any final words, Charles?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's a huge opportunity, maybe for me to step back a bit from the day-to-day work here. And I assure you, there's huge amounts of it every day
I can
to begin to
imagine.
think, to begin to really think about what those big questions are. I still think that at the bottom of all this, and in the context of trying to recover from COVID and not even being sure, is the vaccine the solution? Are there new other technologies that are coming along that will make it cheaper and easier for countries to recover back? The important thing here is to have a sense of hope and direction. I think the Sustainable Development Goals, it is the consensus built agenda of what at least the baseline should be for everybody. a world without hunger, a world without poverty, a world where people increasingly are able to realize their rights. We know that rights is the journey and has always been a journey. And so there are standards that are set up here. The question is less about is less about the standard, but the journey that we use to go towards achieving that standard here.
Yeah.
And I think that the level of partnership and engagement between civic actors, the private sector, the UN, and governments needs to be strengthened even more and called for more robustly across different spaces. And we just must be mindful of those. And so often when we're also in fragile context and things seem to be crumbling, it's easy to lose hope. But I think that actually the SDGs offer a great rallying place to measure where there is progress. And there is no country that does not have progress in certain areas. And then to figure out where there isn't progress and then ask the more productive, solutions-oriented question, what do we do next? What are our big strategic choices to make? And so that's the mix that we're in on a day-to-day basis here. And really, it's been exciting for me so far.
Okay. Thank you so much, Charles. You're repping us really well out there, representing us well. I mean, with regards to transition into going into diplomacy and really going macro and really seeing and tracking the change with regards to SDGs in Africa as a whole. This is a great conversation. We were all looking forward to this conversation, and you did not disappoint. So thank you so much, Charles. You really knocked it out of the park. So this is definitely not going to be our last encounter on Devsectorseries. There's going to be a lot more conversation going on with regards to where Africa is going in terms of how we're looking to the future, how we're meeting, how we're catching up and really making sure that we're part of the conversation with regards to the fourth industrial revolution and how we're even building the continent as a whole. So again, thank you so much, and I look forward to talking with you at another time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Efwa. Thank you, everybody, and
Thank you.
hope to see you all soon sometime.
All right, take care.
Thank you. Bye
All
bye.
right, bye-bye. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us with Mr. Charles Abani, the UN Resident Coordinator in Ghana. See you all again next week. Take care.
And then the environment was cleaned up.
The first time I was hearing about this stuff, it was totally new to me.
With social impact consulting.